sorry to interrupt your listening, folks. I know we all love that song. Just trying to sort out speakers at the moment. Oh, Carrie, I see you've accepted your invite. Derek, trying to get you up as well, but it's been a little bit buggy today, so hopefully we can get there. If you could send a speaker request if you haven't yet, that'd be good. Because it seems the invites my side aren't doing too well. But yes, welcome everyone. It's going to be a great space today. Two very cool speakers. We have some fanboys in the audience. I know that much. I'm sure one of them will pipe up in a minute. But yeah, let's try and get our speakers up as speakers. Derek, can we get a thumbs up if you can hear us?
Yeah, maybe it's so, but yeah, guys, he's right. The spaces today are being a little bit tricky, glitchy, etc. So, but Logos, I'll go ahead and start us up here, and we can I'll get the disclaimers out of the way, provide some context for the discussion, and then we'll go ahead and get rocking and rolling. I have my caffeine here, trying to get as high of a caffeine content into my bloodstream as possible. Actually, it's just going to be a caffeine stream, so we're going to be in really good space here. All right, guys. So the first thing is regular disclaimers, and we'll get the show started here. Number one is any of the ideas that me or Carrie or Derek happen to share are not affiliated with the Logos identity or brand. Any ideas, thoughts, or philosophies that we share are a product of our own minds, and we're here to just share that information with you. Number two is if we happen to bring up a crypto project or any other type of project in the space, nothing that we say is financial advice. So please don't ape into a shitcoin, or if you do ape into a shitcoin, ape into it at your own peril. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, the next thing is this is a guest space. So on Thursdays, we host guests. It's going to be Carrie and Derek, and hopefully we can get Derek up here in just a moment. And what we're going to do is we're going to speak for we have Carrie for 60 minutes and we have Derek for the duration, which is 90 minutes. So at 60 minutes, anybody who wants to come up and engage with the space, ask questions or provide commentary, you're more than welcome to do that. Let me check real quick with Derek and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'll provide the context. Let me see here real quick.
Yo.
We got you. Okay. Yeah, this is glitchy as hell, bro, because it figures it's going to be this space where we all get rugged. I can see you now, though. You're up here, Derek. Cool.
All right, I'm standing by.
Nice, man. Cool. Okay. And Carrie, can you speak and we can
I'm
hear your
here.
voice?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Nice. All right. So here's let me break this down for you guys. So this isn't just a random, I hit up Derek and Carrie out of the blue, like they're just some influencers that I happen to come across online. Derek and Carrie and I have known each other for a long time, going back to, I think with Derek, when I met you, bro, around I want to say 2014 or something crazy.
Yeah, it has to be a decade at least.
Yeah. And Carrie, not long after, we all attended Anarchapulco, gave talks there, and we're part of that community for the longest time. And so what's happening now is that both of these fine human beings have contributed to helping us understand what is happening in the world, especially as it concerns states, corporations, the corporatocracy, the technocracy. They've helped us understand the status quo in terms of how our freedom is under assault, and especially how, and this is particularly speaking to Derek's work too, how the surveillance apparatus or the surveillance regimes try to usurp our freedoms on a regular basis. So we are going to talk a bit about the status quo. I know that we're going to be preaching to the choir for a bit of this, and then we're going to try to get into some solutions with these guys in terms of how we can move the dial forward, how we can exit these technocratic regimes, how we can understand, how we can improve ourselves to also help get out from under the spell of the systematic control apparatus that is sitting in front of us. So Logos are really happy to be hosting you guys today. Welcome to the stage. I want to give Derek and Carrie now a chance or an opportunity to introduce themselves for you guys who haven't heard of them or who aren't familiar with their work. And I do also want to mention briefly that Logos, we have worked with Derek in the past. So Logos sponsored the Greater Reset and the People's Reset twice now, right, Derek? So we've been involved. We've co-collaborated.
Yep, 2 times now.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, let's get it started. Derek, why don't you start us out, brother? Maybe introduce yourself to the folks.
Sure. Thanks again for having me, and thanks to everybody who's here. And of course, it's great to be here with Carrie. My name is Derek Brose. I'm an independent investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker, author, public speaker, free human being, focused on promoting individual liberty, self-ownership, decentralization, solutions, and trying to stay sane with all of the increasingly tyranny that we're seeing in the world, technocracy. I've been reporting on technocracy and writing about it for probably about 6 years now, very specifically and more broadly in general, like with just surveillance for 16 years or so. Probably most relevant to this conversation would be my 2020 book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Been around the freedom space, the crypto space since 2012, 2013. And really, really excited to be here and to work with others who care about the future of humanity, and most specifically who are actually wanting to do something about it instead of just complain on Twitter.
Hi, I'm Carrie Wedler. I have known these guys quite a while. Sterling, I was thinking a good way to gauge how long I've known you is we connected when Facebook was still the most popular social media platform. So it's been quite a long time. And I started almost about the same time as Derek. My focus is not as much on technocratic and surveillance issues. However, my more broader focus and what I really care about is getting to the philosophical and mental and emotional roots of statism and authority in government, because I think these are the things that really allow things like surveillance to run rampant. And so that's something I talk about a lot. And when I was first starting to pay attention, that was when Edward Snowden came out with the revelations, whatever you think of Snowden and his legitimacy. It really pushed surveillance to the forefront of the conversation. Of course, that faded away, but it had a big impact on me, and it really influenced the things I cared about. So all these years I have been talking about that. I also focus on the broader police state, on the empire. I think war was really the first thing that drove me and gave me a call to action of I need to speak. I need to start making content, which that's what I do. I make content, I write articles, I make videos, and I used to run an organization called the Anti-Media that Derek wrote for. And we talked about all these things, we covered all these things, and eventually we were censored. But the spirit of anti-media lives on in me and Derek and so many people who were involved, and surveillance is a big part of that.
Nice. Well said, Carrie. Yeah, you're right. That's a good way to gauge how long we've known each other, being on Facebook since the early times. So really interesting story with the censorship, by the way, and that's something we can probably touch on through the course of this conversation, because all three of us were censored on Facebook around 2017, 2018. My page, Psychologic Anarchist, was totally deleted. I know Derek's, you guys all got removed. Anti-media got removed. Yeah, but maybe we'll get to that here in a minute. So, okay, the conversation for today, guys, and this is something that Logos is really that we're really interested in, and that we're trying to figure out ways to help combat the surveillance apparatus and the surveillance regime. And we know that there's a multitude of ways that we can try to achieve this. One of them is through technology, of course. Also, another one is through developing parallel societies and exit strategy. That's something that Derek has been interested in. But before we get into the solutions, let's first break down the current status quo. Let's try to understand what we're actually up against. And so maybe, Carrie, we can start with you, because you spend a lot of time trying to educate people, deprogram and depropagandize them. So let's hit the ground running. We'll kind of leave the conversation open so you can take it. Feel free to take it where you want.
Yeah, I think Derek is definitely the better person to get into the nitty-gritty details of how this technocracy is constructed. But what I like to focus on really is the propaganda and the programming that leads people to tolerate it and to be okay with it and to think it's fine. Or, maybe not think it's fine, but to kind of just wave their hand away and not pay attention to it. And it's hard to do because it has permeated so much of our daily life. and we're so dependent on these technologies. But I think a point that I really wanted to touch on is that this is not really recent. So surveillance has been going on at least since J. Edgar Hoover. They were doing wiretaps, they were spying on people, and that went into the 60s and the 70s with Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon and the CIA. And they were having the CIA surveil the American population, which is highly illegal within the system. The CIA is not supposed to be a domestic operation, and yet they were doing it. And so a lot of the surveillance we see today, in my view, is sort of a natural progression. And that natural progression for me ties back to the history of big tech in Silicon Valley, which I recently did a deep dive on. Because what I noticed is that it seems like there are no technology companies that do not contract with the government, whether defense or intelligence. And I'm sure there are some exceptions, but the paradigm of the technology industry is that they work with the government. And that goes back to the Cold War and possibly even before World War II, but it really ramped up during the Cold War. And all of these companies started cropping up, and it kind of became built into their business model that they were going to be dependent on the government to succeed. And I don't want to act like that's a hard and fast rule and there are no exceptions, but that really became the standard. And then the intelligence community got in on it as well. So we're looking at the military industrial complex, the intelligence industrial complex. And these things have really been growing for a long time. This isn't just a recent development with the advent of newer technologies. And that's the context I have to offer. And then when you think about these things about the Cold War, about 9/11, fear. There's always fear. And that often leads people to want to give up their agency, to want to give these powers to people in power because they would like that fear to go away. And it's not their fault. And I don't mean it as a judgment. I have plenty of my own fears. And I wasn't born questioning authority. I was actually quite submissive to authority and very afraid of many of the things the government told me to be afraid of. So I don't want to say it as a judgment, but I think that these things really, really, really factor in. And of course, there's apathy because we're so used to it. It's just everywhere. And there's ignorance because a lot of the things that are going on, we don't even know about. Like, there are the things that the government and these corporations are doing that are completely hidden. And then there are the things that are actually public, but because of the corporate media, because of the way things are reported, there's just not a lot of information about how bad it really is. But a big thing that I think is important, and I will keep saying this throughout our conversation, is the power of emotion and fear in driving people's acceptance of this.
Yeah, Carrie, thanks a lot. It's kind of interesting that you're going to touch on this. It is relevant. We actually had a conversation recently on a logo space on the psychology of privacy, and there was some interesting points to how privacy can be undermined that we had in that conversation as well. So thanks. Derek, do you have a follow-up to Carrie's statement? Sir, you're welcome to hit it.
I think Carrie covered a lot of important things there, especially, and I think we'll both emphasize this, just the power of the mind and all this, and how many times we're kind of playing into the fear and allowing they, them, those to win. In terms of surveillance and just the broader question here that we're dealing with, the current state of corporate and government surveillance, I think it's at unprecedented levels. I mean, just today, as we're speaking, there was a new report that came out last night that the U.S. government is about to start requiring all, or not all of foreigners, but foreigners from about a dozen different countries and probably many more very soon, to hand over 5 years worth of their social media data, to hand over their families' addresses and previous locations for going back 5 years. And it's rapidly expanding. And I think, of course, like you said earlier, Sterling, probably everybody here is well aware of these things, or at least, somewhat aware of these kinds of things and why we're having these conversations. I wish I could say that it felt like there was some sort of opposition. I think that maybe a point I want to make at this point is that it's frustrating and sometimes a little overwhelming to see what, from my view, feels like a lack of resistance or even acknowledgement, and maybe more just an acceptance of these kinds of things, where, we've heard this sentiment since post 9/11 of, well, if you have nothing to hide, then, there's nothing to worry about. And I'm sure it was around before then with some of the programs Carrie was talking about before. I'm sure when they first started wiretapping, people were saying, well, if you don't have anything to hide, why do you care if they're listening into your phone calls and your telegrams and whatever else? And I think that sentiment, unfortunately, has really taken a hold. And in some ways, it's because of the beautiful thing we love called the internet, especially with the younger generations who are growing up with phones and devices in their hands and are kind of used to it. Like, I mean, I'm a millennial, as they like to say, and I think Sterling, you and Carrie, we're all kind of in that age range where many of us and our peers, especially when it comes to doing this type of work, we're very used to putting our lives online, or at least some level of our lives online. And the generations after us are even more used to that. And so I don't know that there's even an understanding of why they should be concerned about surveillance in the first place. And I think that's really worrisome, is that people, you know, we could have this conversation all day, and there will be people who, even with the worst stories that we can provide and share and why they should think about it, they might just come back and say, well, I don't really care. I have nothing to hide. I'm a transparent person. Now, ultimately, I think that's bullshit. And I think when I deal with somebody like that in person, my first response is to say, okay, can I see your phone? And then really quickly, people show you that they actually do value privacy, because they don't want to just hand over their phone and have somebody looking through their personal conversations or their personal pictures, even if they're not doing anything illegal or wrong, or there's no nudes in there or anything like that. It's just, you realize, oh, okay, I do actually value some level of privacy. And so I feel like part of my effort and my work with my journalism and my writing and my activism is to try to reinstill that sense of why privacy matters, because ultimately, based on my research of historical movements and historical tyranny, that once privacy goes, liberty goes pretty quickly after it. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that arena of how do we get people to even care about privacy once again. And once they care about it, then we can start talking about some practical solutions.
What you made me think about, Derek, is so when Timothy May, he's responsible for writing the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. Somebody very early on asked him, I think it was a journalist in the early 90s, well, if we were to have total and complete privacy and anonymity online, or an individual could be as anonymous as they want, what are we going to do about all the bad people in the world? What are we going to do about all the fraudsters and the pedophiles and the nasty people who are going to populate these channels online? And Timothy May had a very apt response. It was pretty aggressive, probably in some people's minds, but he said, deal with it. And I think the reason that he said that is because there's always going to be a constant threat from corporate powers, from governmental powers, from institutional powers that can asymmetrically control the population, and because they have more access to information, they have more access to being able to get into people's internal lives. Now they control the algorithms, so it's extremely difficult for a person to actually live as freely as they want, right? Because freedom and privacy co-inhere together. They co-evolve together, and they co-extend together. So if you don't have that, you're in deep trouble. So really, the greatest risk factors from surveillance have almost always been these institutions that don't have our best interest at heart. So it's always easier to deal with the sort of the petty criminal element or the criminal element than it is institutions that have all of this power. Something that we've said in the space, I was talking to some guys at the P2P Hacker Lounge that Logos hosted while we were in Argentina. And I think it was actually Armor from DarkFi. He said that these problems, especially as it concerns technology, the problems of like the criminal element should be handled on the social layer. And the problem, and so anonymity and privacy, that's for the technical layer. And I thought that was a really good look. So anyway, I just wanted to make a comment on that. I think where we can go with the conversation now is something that's interesting. I know, Derek, you've dealt with, Carrie, you've probably heard it before in your work. Whenever we're talking about these issues and we try to bring them to the people, we try to quote unquote enlighten people or give them some ideas to think about, especially as it concerns the status quo. They often say that we're black pilled, right? How are we going to create any kind of change if we're being black pilled? And I definitely think there is a use case and there's validity for us to express the problems, right? Just talking about the idea of there being a surveillance state could be considered black pilled. But all of us here in this space, I know that everyone who follows Logos and who's involved in our community, we all understand these issues. We understand we have to bring awareness to them as well, and then we have to create the solutions. But for more people to be able to create the solutions, you have to have an understanding. And this is where you get clear pilled and how we can move the dial forward. So how would you guys, what would you guys say to this idea of being black pilled when we bring up problems and these issues? How do we address that and reconcile that?
I can go. So yeah, I'm often told I'm black pilled and I'm just negative and I'm just fixating on problems. But for me, as long as I have been doing this work through the lens of volunteerism and, really checking out of this authoritarian mindset, I believe that that is the solution. It's not the only solution, but for me, that seems like a really important solution. And I love that both of you guys kind of touched on this. I was going to say this before, but when Derek said, I asked someone if I can see their phone, and very quickly you realize they care about privacy. I think a real solution is bringing awareness to that double standard where people will tolerate it if it's from the government. If you're a random person spying on you and checking your search history and keeping tabs on all of it, that would be so creepy to most people, and they would know that that is not acceptable. But because you call it an authority, then a lot of people are okay with it. And I think until that mentality starts to change and shift, there's always going to be tolerance for this kind of thing. And so there are other solutions, and we can get into those. But for me, we can have all the tangible material solutions in the world, but if in people's minds they're still subservient to this kind of authority, then I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. So you can call me black-pilled, but I think that it's actually a great solution to get to the root of where this originates, which for me is in the mind and in the heart when people are scared and they're tolerant because they want this fear to go away. And these people in power say, well, we'll keep you safe. Just give us your data. Just give us your information. We'll make sure that you're okay. And that's what I seek to really challenge and break through. And I think I've had some success with it. I do get emails from people saying, and I don't get that many. I don't want to, puff myself up too much, but just to say that I think there is validity. I get people emailing me saying, I used to think this way and your videos challenged me, and now I think more freely. And that is why I do this, because I really think that it starts in the mind.
Yeah, I'll just add, I'm black-pilled. I'm totally black-pilled. Everything's hopeless. No, I'm just playing. I obviously am not black-pilled, and I think that people who try to use that as a label. Well, I'll just give an example, like, not to get off track into the politics, but it's part of the conversation around the election. And I know this is something Carrie dealt with as well, that around the election last year, pretty much a year ago, any of us who were pointing out different concerns regarding Donald Trump were very quickly being labeled black-pilled by a lot of people who, and I think maybe even in the Web3, crypto anarchist space, who wanted to believe that Trump might represent something differently. A lot of those people were not willing or interested in hearing anything negative about Donald Trump, or negative in air quotes, facts about Donald Trump that they deemed as negative. And so this label, I don't think I'd heard the term black-pilled, of course, prior to last November, but I don't think I'd ever seen it used as often as I had around that time. Again, I'd seen Carrie, I'd seen other people who were just pointing out uncomfortable facts, and this label's being put on us. And I thought that was really eye-opening. And it was, for me, it was kind of on a almost a, I don't know if you would say spiritual level, but almost on sort of more of a personal level, realizing that people didn't want to hear facts. People didn't want to hear truth. People would rather deal with, I guess, fantasies than listen to the reality. And I think that does apply with everything, that when it comes to surveillance or any other hard facts that people don't want to face, or really, I think it comes down to they don't know the solution, right? So when it came to Trump, just again, as an example, people would say, well, if that's true, then we're screwed. Okay, if all these things you're saying about Trump are true, and these relationships he has and his relationships with these technocrats, if that's true, then we're completely screwed, because it's either communist Kamala or it's Trump. And if neither one of those options are going to lead to liberty, then I guess, the end of the world is nigh. And so I really think that points to this fact that people, kind of like Carrie was saying, people are afraid. There really is this deep-seated fear that politics won't save us. And I know that's not really probably a mentality most folks have here, who understand there are alternatives to politics and are looking towards things like technology and looking for exit plans and things of that sort. But I think that, for me, that term black-pilled, it comes from that, where it's a reaction to internalized fear and this sort of hopelessness, where people will, and I've literally seen people say this, like, if that's true, okay, you might be correct on this point or that point, but if that's true, then we're completely screwed. And I always try to respond back like, no, these things are true, but it's not the case that means then that we're screwed. That means we have to grow up. We have to be adults and acknowledge that we're the only ones that can, save us and take care of ourselves and our families for the future. And there's not going to be a Trump or anybody else riding in on a white horse to save the day. That means it all comes back to personal responsibility. So then what are you going to do for yourself? What are you going to do for your family? How are we going to create that future that we want? And yeah, so I mean, I think blackpilling and people who fall into that, it really does go back to what Carrie said, that fear of feeling powerless and not knowing what solutions there are. And I think that's also part of the programming too, because for the most part, I've seen this when I go out to I recently, as an example, went out to the No Kings protest, and I did some man on the street interviews just to talk to those folks and kind of get their perspective. And most of them had some, I think, great points about Trump, but then they're also still kind of stuck in the left-right paradigm. And when I asked a few of them, okay, so do you think there's any other path for humanity forward besides just vote for this party or that party? And for the most part, they all figured, well, it's either violent revolution or it's vote for one of the other two parties. What else is there, right? There's nothing else available to us. And I think that's why these kind of conversations are so important, and what Logos and other projects are trying to do to show people that there are other ways and that technology can be a tool for that, because too many people fall into this these kind of false thinking of it's either you're apathetic, you're black-pilled, everything's screwed, or politics one way or the other, left, right, whatever, or it's a violent revolution and there's nothing else available to us. And I think everybody here is seeking that alternative.
Yeah.
And, go ahead. I would love to add something to that, but go ahead first.
Go ahead, Carrie, because I was just gonna transition us, but yeah, please add.
Okay, yeah, just one more thought, and this comes kind of back to the emotional and the spiritual, but I love that Derek mentioned false dichotomy, because I kind of see it's either like there's this false dichotomy of you're black-pilled and you're cynical, or you're positive. And for me, it kind of reminds me of a lot of the spiritual community, of the spiritual bypass and the toxic positivity of just like avoiding what's heavy and what's dark because you don't want to deal with it because it's too scary. And I think that can get very dangerous, because if you're ignoring it, and I'm not accusing anyone of this, but I think there's a real tendency to just not want to sit with what's really scary and difficult. And to me, I see that also reflected in a lot of the reasons that things have gotten so bad, because while I'll just outsource it to government, I'm really scared of terrorists, I'm really scared of immigrants, I'm really scared of XYZ, China, whatever, or right-wing extremists, whatever it is, there's often a fear that people just can't sit with, and they want it to go away, so they give their power away. And I'm not saying that anyone who doesn't like blackpilling and wants solutions is guilty of this. Absolutely not, because I think there has to be some positivity. There has to be some light, or like, what are we even doing? Like, what is the point of raising all this awareness? But I do think I think it's a bit of a false dichotomy, because I think both are essential. I think you need to be able to feel how scary it really is. I'm scared. The way things are going, like I don't want to act like it's just, I'm just courageous and I run my mouth online and I document all these things. No, it's absolutely scary. And I'm so hopeful for the future because of all the things Derek is talking about and all the solutions that are available. But I do think it's a false dichotomy to just cast things as negative and cynical. I think it's really part of the solution to be able to sit with that kind of discomfort and hold space for it without letting it consume you.
Yeah, I think that was perfectly stated, because what both of you guys said, it transitions us very nicely into start thinking about what are the actual solutions to the technocratic regime, what are the solutions to surveillance, how can we exit this. And when I personally talk about exit, I talk about exit in terms of 3 pillars. So there's physical exit, there's mental or economic exit, and then there's spiritual exit. So there's different ways that we can exit the system. Of course, the mental or spiritual exit is, Carrie, what you talk about a lot. Derek, you get into that some, and we also talk about, of course, technological exit, physical exit as well. But the first thing that comes to my mind that we're contending with right now is that a lot of us, and this is the Logos community too, we're trying to figure out ways, because we all here understand clearly, you guys mentioned it, that bloody revolution is not the answer. Working within the context of the failing Westphalian nation state is absolutely abysmal. The political solution doesn't work. Derek, you talk a lot about that in your work. So let's focus on how we actually move the needle forward. And I'll kind of start this conversation out. How we feel about it at Logos and how I feel about it personally is that we now have not only the tools and technologies, but we also have the cultural understanding, the accumulated wisdom, to move outside the scope of these systems and to incrementally build up our own types of communities that allow us to move away from those systems. And look at this. This isn't airy fairy hokum unicorn rainbows and crunchy granola stuff, guys. So let me give you an example of this, and we talk about this sometimes in the space. So an example is in the Czech Republic, right, where before the Czech Republic came into existence, the individuals there, namely Ivan Heros, Václav Havel, what those guys did was create the parallel polis, right? So within the context of that country, they created a second culture or an independent space for living where the people embedded under the communist regime there could actually find space, hold space for each other, exist in parallel to the nation state. And what they did was they actually started, and this is specifically in the vein of surveillance, the communist regime there, of course, was censoring all of their materials, and they did what they called samizdat, where they reprinted previously censored materials as zines and publications, and they passed them around so that everyone in this parallel community, this parallel polis, could have access to information that was being censored. And what this actually led to, it culminated in 1989, I believe, as the Velvet Revolution, where it was mostly a peaceful abdication of the communist regime in Czech. And actually, Václav Havel actually went on to become the quote-unquote president. It ended up like that, probably not the direction that we want to go, but it does speak to this idea that we can create parallel societies, we can create exit networks for us to engage with in the form of community to push back against the system. You know, I'm a big fan of this idea that Gandhi had called satyagraha. Satyagraha is just the notion of like peace force. It's being there, being present with the community, and peacefully pushing back via social tech, general technology, blockchain, whatever the tech is. You're there, you're being peaceful, but you're exiting and pushing back against the status quo. And I think this is just one really good example. So I'm hoping you guys, let's fill in some more of the blanks and talk about where we are at in the present and how we can actually gain more autonomy and help push back against the surveillance state right now. I know we've touched on it a little bit, but now we can really explore we can plumb the depths, so to speak.
I'll take a swing at this. So for one, Sterling, I appreciate the kind of setting up in these different pillars, as you put it, like technological, physical, and what was the third one you mentioned?
Like spiritual or mental.
Spiritual. Okay, yeah. Because I think that's definitely for my mind, the appropriate holistic context that it should be in. I think each of those areas, and obviously we could get, as you get into the nuances of each of those, there's even further places to go. But I think that's important because I'll just say from my experience, kind of focusing on parallel systems and agorism, counter economics for pretty much since the beginning of my activism in 2011, and then refining it more in the last few years with what I call exit and build. I do think that a holistic approach is most effective. And I don't think that, that's not to say that every area needs to be worked on at all times, that every person is going to be, equally advanced in each area, right? Some people might put more of an emphasis on the spiritual, mental, personal development and exit plan, while others are doing the physical location. And that could be like, growing your own food, getting out of the mainstream food supply, or getting land, stuff like that. But I do think that they're all valuable, and they all should be given some time and attention. So I guess I would say when it comes to what we're talking about with surveillance and the broader picture, I mean, that I think is why this is why I'm sitting here communicating with you guys via a Linux laptop right now. This is why I'm, using as much so-called alternative privacy technology as possible. I'm talking to you on a LibreWolf privacy browser, right? These kind of simple, not very difficult steps to take at all that we can all move towards, I think are vastly overlooked. And so many people, even in the freedom kind of mindset, broader freedom, truth, crypto anarchist space, all these overlapping different spaces, that these kind of things are overlooked. I'll just give an example. Like I have been invited to speak at a lot of different events, some that are termed transformational events. This is in the jungles of Costa Rica, and doing yoga and meditation and having really deep conversations about individual healing and trauma and permaculture and, some of these things we're discussing here. And I will be invited to speak at these events, and they'll send me the details for everything I need to know, and they'll send it to me on a Google Drive. They'll send it to me on a Google Sheet, right? Doing great work, but then still using the tools of the technocracy. And whether or not, you care about the surveillance aspect, I think, I'm a big believer that we also need to be striving to live in line with our values and principles. So even for me, let's say that I woke up tomorrow and this whole technocracy and surveillance state just magically disappeared, I still would be pursuing this direction because it's more in line with my values. And I don't want to support a company like Google or others who are building, war machines and working with governments who are committing violent acts, or working with China to develop a censored search engine for their people, or taking all the sort of things that we could go on and on about. To me, that's reason enough to not want to work with these types of companies. And I find that to be frustrating and challenging when I see good people doing great work in the crypto space, in the spiritual space, in the conscious space, what have you, but they're doing it with the tools of the machine, so to speak, right? They're doing it with the tools of the people that I think we're trying to overcome and get around and away from. And so I think the tech side is under that pillar of physical, like the tech side is, as well as the physical and the spiritual, all of these really, but the tech side is one area that we can really take some easy steps. I mean, right now, everybody who's hearing this could choose to start using other search engines than Google. Everybody could choose to start learning more about privacy browsers, or start using something other than Google or Apple Maps. And because the thing is, just like with Logos and other projects out there, these tools, these projects exist. I mean, they're not going to be found at your local electronics store, Best Buy or something like that. You're not going to walk in there and find a privacy laptop or a privacy phone. You're going to find Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. Because they have the monopolies they have. So you have to kind of go out of your way, just like many of us reject mainstream media, or at least seek alternatives to that in many cases, instead of just solely relying on that. I believe it's imperative that we also seek alternatives to all these other tools, right? And it's not going to be just handed to you. As I said, you're not going to find it at the local big box stores. You have to kind of go out of your way to find these tools, but they are available. And in fact, the more you learn about them and choose to support these companies or these projects, then the better their chances of survival. Because I think we probably all here could point to really cool ideas and projects that have popped up over the last 10 to 15 to 20 years that have come and gone. And it's not because they weren't effective or they weren't great ideas. It's largely because they didn't have funding, because they didn't have users. They just eventually have to move on with their lives because, they got to pay the bills somehow. So for me, when we're talking about exit plan, whether you're looking at any of these different pillars, it's also about living in line with our values is kind of how I see it. So if I want to strive to influence other people to act in a certain way and to care more about their privacy and their individual liberty and their mental and spiritual health, I believe the best way to do that is to lead by example. So that's what I try to work on. And I think that the technological space is one of the easiest places to start.
Yeah, I love all that. I think Derek is like the the real solutions guy. Sorry, excuse me, my voice is getting out a little bit. One moment. Need some water. I did just a few more examples of solutions oriented technology, and I have a question for both of you guys that has riddled me for years. But some of the solutions I really like, and full disclaimer, they've come from a super engineer who shared them with me, so I trust their opinion. But there's something called Archive Box that I really like. So it's sort of the next step of something like archive.is or the Wayback Machine. Those are out there. Archive Box, you can go to their website, but it's sort of like your own personal archive.s that cannot be tampered with, which I think is really cool, especially when we're talking about things like censorship. Sometimes, especially when I was doing anti-media, I'd find a source, I'd find something in an AP article. This happened during Standing Rock, actually. And I remember citing the article, and we were called the anti-media, and something kind of silly and clever we did was kind of like use their own sourcing against them to break through their narratives. And I remember going back to they had said something about a police presence there. And I put it in my article. I went back to proof my article the next day, and it was not in the article anymore. And at that point, I was able to get a version of it on Wayback Machine. This was like 10 years ago now. But moving forward, and as this technocracy keeps ramping up, I think Archive Box is really cool because you're not dependent on something like archive.s, because I'm pretty sure that got tampered with, or there was something going on just a few weeks ago where archive.is was not accessible. So I think that one's really cool. I use Nextcloud as a replacement for Google Docs. It's just really cool. I write my articles in there. I love that. And then there's a couple really specific ones I want to share that are quite niche, and I think probably more for people who are more familiar with technology, but I think they're worth mentioning. There's something called Sovereign Systems. It's spelled SOVRAN. And this guy's creating software for computers that's open source, decentralized, it's privacy focused, and it's your own server. So if you're into running your own server, I would definitely recommend looking into that. And then if you go on GitHub, if you're a tech nerd, I'm sure you know what GitHub is. Probably not even if you're a tech nerd. I think it's more mainstream than I realize. But there's something, you can search awesome self-hosted software, specifically that, awesome self-hosted software. And it's a lot of options for software you can run yourself. And it has a focus of being oriented away from big tech. But the warning from the engineer nerd I trust is proceed with caution, use your own judgment. Like, just because it's on that list does not mean it's great. And then one other thing I want to say, which sounds a little silly, but if you are really concerned, I mean, it's pervasive. Surveillance is everywhere. They're tracking, they're recording. And this maybe sounds a little trite. I don't mean it as trite, but like, go outside and leave your phone. Like, leave it alone. Don't let it come with you. And then you get the added benefit of reconnecting with nature. And that brings us back to the spirituality and the emotion and the kind of like not allowing that reactivity to permeate all of our lives. So those are my little examples. But I have a question for you guys. This is the one, because we've been having this conversation, I think, since before we were even banned with anti-media. But there's this constant back and forth of like, okay, we need alternative platforms, but the normies we want to reach are on the regular platforms. So yes, we can have these alternative social media sites where we can connect, and that's really important to have community. But what is the solution for reaching people that we really feel we need to reach, to challenge their mindsets, to give them information, if most people are still on these mainstream platforms? Like, how do we navigate that? And what is a real solution to continue to reach these people without, reaching them where they're at? I'm curious what you guys think.
Derek, you want to take a shot at it first?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question, Carrie, because I could probably find on my website videos I did back in 2015 of like, everybody leave Facebook and join Minds or join BitChute and all the alternatives, which I'm still using. And the reality is there's never been a mass exodus, and I don't think there ever will be. I mean, I hate to say that. I hope that there will be some. I pray and I wish for it, but I have my doubts, because people are creatures of habit. There's always been this talk of like, what's going to be the Facebook killer app? And obviously Twitter, X, has, I think, gotten more popular, and Facebook is definitely still used by a good amount of people, but it's not the most popular app. People are going to TikTok. Like, we have these mainstream apps that are out there: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I count Twitter among them. And that's just where people are at. At the same time, we have all these great alternatives. There are open source, decentralized versions. There's different protocols. There's Nostr. There's others. And I support them and I embrace them and I use them as much as I can. But the fact still remains, after all these years, that I get more views on YouTube. I get more views on Twitter and Facebook, So I don't want to say I've given up completely, but in a way, I kind of have. Like, I don't put as much effort, for sure, into what I did years ago of like, guys, I'm leaving these platforms, join me, let's do a mass exodus. And there was some success. Again, I do get traffic on the other platforms. I love Odyssey. I appreciate the team there and everybody who's working on these alternatives. But the masses are where they're at, and they're creatures of habit. And like Carrie said, like, for us, I know for both of us, and probably everybody here who creates content, the goal is to reach people, right? I mean, I got into this work purely from an activist mindset, not because I wanted to be some internet influencer, but because I'm trying to change the world for the better, and I want to improve it. I want to leave behind a better world than the one I found for my niece and nephews and any potential future children, right? Like, that's what I'm aiming for. And if we separate ourselves exclusively in these silos, I still do use them. Again, I kind of do both. But if we say, well, I'm not going to use any of those anymore, then I do think that we probably are hurting ourselves, at least in that goal of reaching the masses. And I think that the same argument could have been made, like, for example, with the beginning of the internet. I mean, we know, Carrie kind of touched on this, that all these different, the internet itself and a lot of these, if not all of them, major tech platforms receive seed funding from NQTEL, from the CIA, from intelligence firms, or, you know, their original designs came from DoD, DARPA funding, stuff like that, right? We could go on and on about that. And so if we had gone back to the beginning of the internet, we could have said, no, we're not going to use it because it's their tools, and let's just completely, you know, stay away from the internet. And then we would have missed all the amazing opportunities. You know, back in the day, whenever we were at Anti-Media and some of the other websites I wrote for, we could look at our analytics and we could see that we were kicking CNN's ass. We could see that we were reaching hundreds of millions of people a week. It was a beautiful, beautiful time. And we would never have been able to accomplish that if we had just said, no, we're not going to use the tools because they belong to them, and so we're going to stay away. And I think the same argument could be made about social media. And I've had to reflect on this a lot, because to me, part of it is a compromise of my values and principles. I do not like YouTube. I do not like Google. I don't take any money from them. That's kind of the way I view it, is like, okay, I'll put my content on their platform, and I know they're, you know, going to monetize it in their own ways, but I'm not going to take any money from them. I'm not going to participate in that system in that way. I'll put my content there to reach people, but that's about as much as I'll do. So yeah, I mean, I think we have to use what works, and I think we still should, of course, strive to be within principles, and everybody's going to have a different line in the sand of like what they're willing to do. Some people are like, hey, I'm going to join TikTok. That's where all the kids are now, so I'm going to go there. Others are like, I'm not participating in the brain rot, you know. So we're all going to have different lines, and I think it's up to each of us as individuals. But I do think, in the interest for myself of reaching as many people as possible, I'm going to stay on these platforms until they delete me again, which they did delete me in 2020 and elsewhere. And then magically, for some reason, somebody turned back on my YouTube channel last year.
That was as much of a flawless answer to Carrie's question as I can reasonably think of, Derek. So here's just my perspective from having worked in tech for so long, worked in crypto, working in the quote unquote network state or parallel society space, blockchain community space for the last couple of years. So there's been a huge, first of all, there's been a huge initiative or a huge effort to make quote unquote privacy normal, or to normalize it, or a way that Amir puts it is that privacy is exceptional. So there's been a huge push of what I would refer to as counter propaganda to create an environment where we start to control the narrative around privacy and around the usage of different kinds of platforms in order to bring more people in. And I think that's had some decent effect, because there has been more people that even reach out to us at Logos. So like, we want more. We can see this right now, by the way, guys, in the quote unquote Web3 space. There are more people who are starting to boot up privacy centric spaces. And I think this is this has to be the first step. This has to get the snowball rolling down the hill, so to speak, of getting more people interested first in privacy before they start to take seriously some of these alternative platforms. And this goes into another question. This is what you spoke to, Derek. One of the reasons why a lot of these different platforms, like I remember Float was a thing for the longest time that people were trying to migrate over to. There's been a number of different social media platforms that have tried to rise, but a couple of the issues here is, one is around like UI and UX, having the usability that makes sense for the average user to use it. There has to be a focus on that point as well, because the everyday person, unless their friends are there and unless it's easily usable and it has all the features they like, it has that feature set, it's going to be unlikely that they're going to adopt that platform. You have to create momentum around it. You have to have some gravitas in terms of your marketing and the cultures that you create there. And it's really difficult to compete against the legacy institutions and the legacy platforms, because they have, for one, they have the first mover advantage, right? Leveraging Web 2 tech, leveraging the status quo, and they also have a bunch of political support. They have the technocratic regime at their disposal. So it makes it really difficult to get people to migrate over. That's one of the reasons that I'm so proud of what Logos has been working on as well, right? The fact that we're really developing the complete decentralized stack. I'm not going to get too shilly now, but the idea is that we have to first create the infrastructure and the public goods for allowing the deployment of these types of protocols that actually will be more private, more decentralized, more censorship resistant. It's it's a long road to get there. And I'm also like you, Derek. I am definitely skeptical in the short term of how many people are going to move over. And I'm of the mindset that we certainly do need these traditional platforms. This is another point that maybe wasn't mentioned. I'm a public person. I've been public on Facebook and on X, so I don't really mind the fact that the surveillance apparatus is just trying to surveil me at any step of the way. Sure, maybe my content, our spaces, our ideas will help change their minds as they're surveilling us. So any of the Fed boys or Alphabet Soup boys that are in this chat, welcome to the chat. I hope you enjoy the conversation. But this is the whole point. I have no problem being in these spaces, just like you, Derek, to help get people to think about these ideas and to understand the trajectory of where we're trying to go. And then, but of course, along the way, we'll continue supporting all the projects that are trying to build a future that is more private, that is more decentralized, and that is more censorship resistant. I do think that it's a matter of time before we do reach a critical mass in these spaces, but it's going to be terribly difficult. I know, Carrie, you only have about 5 minutes left here, so I want to give you a chance or an opportunity to say your piece so we can be respectful of your time, and then we'll get some folks up here so you guys can ask Derek some questions, and we can get into maybe some more details of his work and his books and such as well. But Carrie, go for it, my friend.
Cool. Yeah, I love what you guys said. I'm totally on the same page. I'm staying until they ban me, and if they ban me, I'll make another account, and then they can ban me again and shadow ban me. I will be there. I will be posting my content, even if I'm screaming into the void. Just as long as there's a chance, I'm going to do it. But I think the last thing that I really want to touch on is I want to say this without judgment because I'm a human being too, but I think there's a real tendency, especially in conversations about surveillance and privacy, to be speaking from a place of fear. You know, like how are they tracking me? How are they doing this? And then seeking out the solutions from that standpoint rather than a valuing privacy. And they can go together, but I think it's an interesting thing to examine within yourself, within these communities, of how much of this is really driven by the exact same emotions that are actually driving the surveillance state of the fear and the, for me, it's fear. And I don't think fear is a bad thing. It's part of being human, and we all have feelings, and those include being scared and being fearful. But I think it's probably helpful to look within yourself and to ask yourself what's motivating you. And it's not wrong and bad if you are driven by fear, but I think it would be perhaps worthwhile to dig into some of those feelings, because I don't ever want to be controlled by my feelings, even if it's for a good cause. I don't want to be driven by fear, and I keep saying the word fear, but that's just the best word to describe it. So I think it's just something that we could all be mindful of when we're having these conversations and when we're seeking out solutions. And it's okay that it's there. Again, I don't want to shame anyone for being afraid. It's very scary. I have my own fears, but when we're building these new systems, when we're seeking them out, when we're using them and adopting them, I just think it's very valuable to go within and to pay attention to what's going on within ourselves, because I think it's when we lose that disconnection to ourselves and our feelings and our spirit, that things can really go off the rails. So if these new technologies are being built with that same kind of mentality, even if it's a totally different technological advancement that is objectively antithetical and challenging these systems, I still think that it comes down to the human being, and human beings have feelings, they have emotions, they have a spiritual experience. Like, it's not just the practical, tangible solution. So I personally would like to see more awareness of that, so that we can, one, hold space for it, not make it go away. I don't advocate numbing your emotions or ignoring them or casting them aside, but becoming aware of them so we can integrate them so they're not running the show as we move forward.
Yeah, well said. The emotional part is going to continue to be really vital. And I'm glad that you came into the space, Carrie, to make that point, because it is a topic that we have not spoken about a lot, but we have spoken about it some in the Logos community. But I know generally in Web3, there is not a huge interest in focusing on self-healing, holistic betterment, understanding that we have to improve ourselves to achieve any sense of human flourishing into the deep future. And what we actually end up seeing, and this is something we critique a lot too, is within the context of Web3. If you just take a look at all the spaces that emerge on X, a lot of people are focused on when moon, when Lambo, when number go up. It's all about technical analysis. I said before, that's just astrology for dudes. So at what point can we actually get people to start thinking about these, not only the important topics that we're talking about today, but the criticality of self-improvement and understanding where your fears arise as we're trying to combat surveillance. Because there is, I think, a sentiment for a lot of people who see everything that's happening, and this goes back to the black pill conversation, where they just want to hide in the room at night, pull the sheets over their head, and then hope everything is just going to end up okay, right? Or as the world collapses all around them. But we do know, and this is 100% clear, guys, we have the technology, we're developing the technology, but it's not only that, we have the exit ethos, we have a mindset toward actually leaving these systems in their entirety. And I think the mindset behind that is a huge catalyst or driver for creating the kind of future that we want to see. We can't just sit numbed and scared and not do anything about it. We have to act in a way that helps manifest the future. You know, one of the authors, I was reading this book recently called Nordic Ideology, where the author talks about this idea of attractors, right? In a chaotic system, and an attractor is something that manifests within the context of that chaotic system. And in reality, an attractor is something that we can see before it becomes critical, or before it becomes a phenomenon. We have to focus on it to build it out, right? Bringing the abstraction down, that was Bitcoin. At one point in time, Bitcoin was an attractor. We saw that, and a few people cared about it. People like Ross Ulbricht, people like Roger Ver, and they focused on seeding that ecosystem and building it out. We just have to do the same thing for privacy tech, for blockchain communities, for parallel societies, and we build it out. I very strongly believe that we can manifest it. This idea of manifestation is something that Derek also talks about in his work, and it's something that I think we have to very strongly abide by, especially if we start to understand the emotional content and where we're at in our own lives. It's just 100% critical. Cool. So yeah, I know it's time for you there, Carrie. I just want to say thank you for your time again. We really appreciate you coming on to the space today. And so wanted to give you cheers and say thanks again.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me, and thank you for all the great work you're doing. I really admire and respect all of you, so it's an honor to get to chat with you and talk about all these really important issues.
Yep, hope to see you again soon.
For sure. Bye.
Cheers. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to take the time, guys, to reset the room. We have Derek for another 30 minutes, and I know there's been a few people who have tried to come up into the space. We've done spaces before where we just invited people out from the get-go on a gift space, and it ends up getting derailed, and so someone comes up here and their microphone is completely bunk, and all kinds of bad things happen. So we try to prevent that. And by the way, so right now, if you guys want to come up, please request, and you can come up. We can ask Derek some questions, or you can add some commentary. Please try to keep the conversation relevant to this discussion. Don't try to shill your project. We want to add as much value as possible to the audience that we have right now. And we had a few folks earlier, so I'm sorry we didn't bring you up earlier, but this is the game that we're playing now. Let's see. We have Dave is coming up. I think, Derek, you probably already know Dave. He was at the People's Reset, and I'm sure we'll be there again this year. Dave has become a part of the Logos community as well, and is just an overall great guy. So let's see.
Cool.
I see now that we have Arena up on stage as well. I didn't see that we brought you up, Arena. You were up here first, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask Derek a question or make a comment first.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I think I'm going to be very short because I lost my train of thought listening to the conversation since I'd like to speak. But what I wanted to say, like very shortly, was actually in response to Carrie, because she opened up this question of the media that we're using to reach as many people as possible. And I think like what we're forgetting is that we have to reach all the people who left those media just because of the values that they share with us. They are just not like following the kind of like the technological alternatives. Like in my friends group, I don't know if it's like very special social bubble, but I'm the one who's like actively using Twitter, which I hate, with like the flame of 1,000 burning suns, but I'm using it because we build this industry around Twitter. And I have so many friends who don't just have any social media, no Facebook, no TikTok, no Instagram. They just when they, when shit hit the fan, they just left and they don't want to come back. And those are the people that we might need to, bring on first, because they already share values. They kind of might miss the functionality, but they're not coming back. So I think just focusing maybe not wait, good mindset would be not wait for this huge wave of people who will come from the centralized social media, but kind of like take it step by step, like build something with the people that already share the values and, like they know, and kind of like rely on the network effect of actual real physical networks. So yeah, that was just my quick point, but I will be happy to give it to Dave because I forgot all the rest that I wanted to say. Thanks for having me, Sterling.
Absolutely. Yeah, Derek, any responses or thoughts to that? Did we lose Derek or did you lose me? Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you. Yeah.
I can hear you.
Oh yeah, there you go, Derek. I was going to see if you had a response to her question.
To her comment, I think that it's worth. Like I said, I mean, I'm in all the spaces, whether it's the mainstream ones or the so-called alternatives, because I do meet great people in those other spaces as well, and I'm grateful whenever I find people who already understand.
Oh no.
Yeah, just hold tight, guys. Yeah, Derek, you're breaking up a little bit, my man. Actually, a lot of bit. Yeah, maybe. So, guys, Derek's breaking up a little bit. That's fine. We can have a conversation until we can get him back up here. I think it's either going to be an internet bandwidth issue or it is going to be an X issue. That we do have a tendency or a habit of getting rug pulled. By the way, give me a thumbs up, guys, if you can still hear me okay, and I'm coming through loud and clear. Sweet. Okay. Nice. So, Derek, we might get you to reboot. Let me send him a message real quick, guys, and then we'll have a conversation here.
Sometimes like closing the app and reopening it is a solution.
Cool. So maybe I'll just respond to Arena's thought from my perspective. So yeah, when it comes to any of these, and you were specifically asking about any kind of social media platforms, right? Arena, can you summarize your question one more time? And then also we have some other people who may want to engage in the conversation.
Yes, no, it was more a point that basically there are already people who left those media. So like using only those media to reach people is not, like exhaustive of the ways we should be like passing this message on.
Right. Yeah, that's a challenging question, right? Because first of all, we have to know where those people actually went. It's possible that some of them just left social. If they're really dedicated to being anonymous and private, they might have just left in its entirety, or they joined a platform that is more private. Like there's a lot of people who are just messaging their friends and speaking with their friends on Signal. But they're also interesting enough. A lot of people who have gone over to platforms like Reddit. Interestingly, there's a lot of people who try to be anon on Reddit, even though it's not anonymous. So trying to contact people over on platforms like those probably makes sense. Check it out. Also over at DarkFi, they have our friends Amir and Rose. They have Dark IRC. That is a completely anonymized chat app, which I recommend checking out. There might have been some people who have found their way over to platforms and applications like that as well. And so trying to find those folks might be a good thing, right? But also a good thing is if they have left these platforms because they realize also that they want to maintain their privacy and anonymity, the good news is they're already in the know, at least with what the kind of material that we're talking about. And so maybe it's not as big of an issue for that particular cohort. But that's just my take on it. For those folks who aren't in the know and left, we'll probably have to find them on other kinds of platforms and just broaden our footprint in terms of where we're pushing the message out. And so that's my response to that. I want to welcome Dave, Chair, and Citizen to the stage. Dave was up next. If you want to have any comments or thoughts on what we're discussing, you're more than welcome to. And I'm going to see what happened to Derek.
Yeah, get Derek back in here, man. He's good people. Well, while he's waiting to come back, I'll sing his praises a little bit more. Just a personal story. I was always a fan of his writing as an independent journalist for years before, like the COVID nonsense. And living in California during that time with the extreme levels of lockdowns and things like that, that were, some of the worst in the world. I know a lot of places had it pretty bad, but California chose violence, and I kind of white knuckled it in the Bay Area for a few years, and finally escaped, did my exit from there. But a big reason why I did was going to see Derek speak in person in Northern California, like in, I don't know, 2022, let's say. He was on a tour and talking about specifically exit and build. And it was the first time I was exposed. I already knew who he was, but it was the first time I was exposed to kind of the freedom cells and this concept of exit and building and parallel societies from a, I knew about them conceptually, let's say, but this was my first introduction. And not only was it cool to hear him kind of lay that thesis out, but I found myself on, whatever this evening was, Northern California evening, listening to him speak with like, I don't know, 50, 75 other people who had gathered, and that to me was all the proof that I needed. It was like after white knuckling it through years of repression, here was, dozens and dozens and dozens of community, real in person, in life. I know a lot. We talk about parallel societies, et cetera, as a digital first kind of community, and that's clearly very important. But to have that in person was just striking and honestly life changing to know that here were people here and by extension people all over the world. And from there I left California. I found other freedom cells in Texas and Mexico and Europe, and I kind of combined my tech journey into a bridging into a real world, real life meets tech journey with the exit and build ethos. The other point that I wanted to make, and not specifically about Derek, but just it to the general topic of Web3. I know we've been talking a lot about this concept of which online community, can I post on or will not censor me or block my account. But I think the magic of Web3 ultimately is that it reverses this concept of I want to find content and I want to put out content. And it takes it away from the walled garden of what social network you choose: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, whatever it is, and more privacy preserving, less privacy preserving. But the concept of Web3 is that the content itself is king. And so that content lives on a blockchain, and ideally it can be using, something like the Logos blockchain, which would provide zero knowledge privacy and encryption and things like that. But in general, I liken it almost to the old RSS feeds back in the 80s, 90s, where if you liked a certain writer or their ideas or modern day their video content, you followed that creator, and it didn't matter where they were posting. And I think that's unfortunately I've struggled at trying to build like Web3 social companies, and the problem comes down to when you destroy the walled garden, you destroy the ability for a centralized entity that's you know just essentially just building that technology for people to use. You take away the ability to really profit, because why do I want to go to your platform to see the greatest awesome creators uh, for $1 a month when I can go to this platform over here and see the same awesome creators for 50 cents a month or for free, as we see a lot. And so competing against free and trying to justify people paying, especially, paying for something when you lock into a community and you get all the benefits of that community is one thing. But with Web3, I don't need to view the creator's content of my choice on your platform. I can go view it just directly on the blockchain if I want. So I think that's the challenge in Web3 is how do we build these essentially as public goods in a way that is usable for people, for creators, for people who want to find content, but not in a way that gatekeeps or puts up new kinds of weird Web3 walled gardens. So there's some best practices and ideas floating around about that. But I think for the purposes of Web3, we should be thinking less about what platform do we go to, what walled garden do we go to, and we just think about it as content wants to be free. Creators want to create their content and be viewed anywhere and everywhere at all times. And so we just need the tools that allow people to create and view that content separate from any kind of a walled garden. So anyway, thanks guys, and thank you, Derek, for being here.
All right, first let's check. Yeah, by the way, Dave, well said. Content wants to be free. Let's get it out of our mind regarding walled gardens and going to a walled garden platform. I really like that take on how we can view content. So let's see if we got Derek back first. Derek, are you with us, brother?
Yo.
Yep, loud and clear. Cool. So let's we'll continue to take some questions here. I think that
Can I make a quick comment, Sterling, just on what Dave shared there?
Oh yeah, sure, please.
Nothing huge, but just and I don't want to take us in a different direction, but I tend to be skeptical that the average internet user even wants this kind of tech that awesome people like Dave and everybody at Logos are trying to work on. I just think that most people want the simplest, easiest process. Because I know other really awesome projects that are doing great things, and they're coming from a tech, developer coder mindset, and to them it all makes sense and it's simple and it's easy. I don't want to name any names because they're great projects, and I'm not, don't want to put down anybody because that's not my intention. But I think sometimes people get so tunnel vision on that, and I know people think about user experience and everything, but that the average person, like let's just say like my mom, who just scrolls through Instagram every now and then, or Facebook and stuff, doesn't want to have any more complicated of a process other than just opening up a window and then looking at whatever they want. And I think that's one thing that developers and creators, builders need to take into consideration. I'm not so sure the average person actually wants Web3 or any of these things if they have to think about it. They just want it to be built in, privacy. But if we build in everything, and I think that's of course the goal, if privacy is built in, if all these other things are built in, then sure, people will do it. But if it involves any extra steps, any extra work, I think that's just going to be a hindrance.
Yep. Nicely said. And I think that definitely goes back to our conversation earlier too, in terms of ease of use and access for individuals. Cool. So in the interest of time, let's move on to our patient speakers who've been waiting to ask Derek a question or add a comment. Who was first? Was it Chair? I think a Chair was first.
I'll go real quick. It's very exciting that Derek is here today, and that I was listening to and following Derek in completely other circles and from other show appearances that he's had. And very entertaining. To the simple and easy point, I very much agree, and people will continue to use the simplest and easiest thing, or the thing that everyone else is on, until that moment where they need to use something else. And what doesn't exist yet is, and kind of what Logos is striving for. Corey Petty said it the other day in our space, like the optionality to be as private or public as you want to be, and ideally within the same system so that you don't have to use too many different ones. But to have the ability to operate in a completely shielded way, and then to optionally reveal whatever needs to be revealed in the system or scheme that you're operating in. If it's a social media, and okay, then you want something attributed to yourself, or you're publishing something, or you're broadcasting something. But then at the same time, if you're participating in some sort of governance thing or something more sensitive, I mean, all those things are obvious, but the optionality to either, you can be in some ways, if you are quite tech savvy, or at least operationally savvy, then you can operate in a very private way, but then that limits people who want or need to be more public. And like striking that balance, or having that optionality, I guess is the first step to striking that balance. It's interesting, like in there's a big opportunity, I think, in that the only, I mean, there's Lens and there's Farcaster, and Farcaster just decided that they're not going to do social media anymore, or whatever they're doing over there. So I think there's a very interesting opportunity at the moment. I'll shut up here in a second. Thank you everyone for being here. Like and retweet the space if you haven't already. It's pinned up at the top. My big question for Derek is, what tools do you need at the moment, or what would make your life easier where you would have the optionality of being private or public, that you don't have right now, that perhaps the Logos community and Logos circles can focus on a little bit?
Hey, Chair. Thanks for the comments and for the questions. That's an interesting one. I think just on like a practical side of things, I probably am wasting a great amount of time by the amount of, I have a small team that I work with, right? And that help me out with different tasks. But by and large, when I create a new piece of content, I'm the one writing or filming it, uploading it to 10 different places, and all that stuff, and that's very time consuming. It would be great, I think, if there was a tool, and I know that they exist to some degree, where there's these different tools that allow you to cross post, and mostly the mainstream platforms, but one that would be accessible, a way for me to just try to save time on that, like from my creation process to posting and getting it out to the world. Like, how do I do that in a simple way that is still both private and decentralized, distributed where possible, to just save me time on that? I mean, I think that's just kind of the first immediate thing that comes to mind.
Nice. So yeah, I think of like content management tools that are decentralized, private, censorship resistant. That is definitely something to think about, especially as the stack goes live on Logo side. That's something that's definitely buildable. Cool. Okay, Citizen Intuition, you are up, my friend. Welcome to the stage.
Hey, what's going on? I appreciate the conversation. Logos, I think this is the first time I've ever interacted with you. So been following Derek Bros for quite some time. I really appreciate this conversation because I have this conversation within my own mind all the time. And it's been that way for years. And it's a little bit exhausting. The environment you're talking about, there's like two extremes. You have full participation within the current system without asking questions and basically completely complying with everything that's being thrown at them. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have total detachment, living off grid, not participating in any facet of it, right? And so there's all these different layers in between those two extremes. And I think that one of the most difficult things for somebody like me who already has an idea and has been pushing back and wants to detach, but also has this part of my life that I know will never detach, right, from this type of system, the ability to navigate between what we want and where we're at and who we love. And so like there's no easy answer. And so if you look at the different phases, I think you have a group of people, a large group of people that want privacy rights. They understand the social media landscape to a certain degree. They're not with it. They don't know how to necessarily detach from it. And they also want to be able to control some of the things in their life, like food and health and basic decisions. And so like there's this big chunk of people that I think want the same thing. Now, part of the problem is a lot of the solutions being presented to us, there are a lot of people with ill intentions. There's also the problem of competition getting acquired by these large, giant corporations and social media platforms. And so they end up gobbling any potential competitor that would offer a solution anytime they get momentum. And if that doesn't happen, well, then you see the government and other people coming down on them hardcore. So like it's this constant hamster wheel, this environment that just, we know the problems, we know the solutions to a certain degree, right? We know the players, but the ability to actually move away, gain full adoption, be able to be heard, be able to still interact with the people we love and enjoy some of the things that we've grown accustomed to liking, there's almost an possibility of all of those things merging sometimes within the current structures, right? Because obviously there are people trying to keep that from happening. So it's a very delicate situation. You also have to have the money to be able to detach in order to grow your own food, start a farm, live off grid to a certain degree, right? The ability to build a solution either requires a very specific type of skill or requires a certain amount of funding, right? And so I don't have any solutions. Maybe Derek can speak to some of the problems that and obstacles he's had to overcome, and if he relates to some of the things I'm speaking to. I'm just telling you from my perspective, these are the challenges, right? And that I'm battling with on a daily basis. And I'm not even sure what direction I want to go in this next phase of my life. My child is an adult. I don't have any, hardcore ties other than people that I love and I want to maintain relationships with. But in terms of the workforce and like right now, I'm at a total standstill. I've got whiteboards, like which direction do I want to go? At some point I got to pull the trigger, and it's not an easy task. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. I appreciate that and your thoughtfulness on this topic, because I think it's much needed, and I wish there were more people who are taking these conversations as serious as everybody here is. And yeah, I mean, I empathize with and the challenges that all of this presents, and how do we go about this? As I kind of shared earlier, everybody's got their own path and their own their own line in the sand. I'm a little bit of an extremist. For anybody who follows my work probably understands that. So I mean, I'm trying to push out to the edges, and not with any expectation that everybody, quote unquote, follow me there, but I guess as a way to both live in line with my own values, but also try to inspire people to find what out there works for them, right? So what I mean by that is to say, in these different pillars, for example, that Sterling mentioned, I do have land. I bought land here in Mexico. I've moved out of the US because I think this is where the best future is for me. We're growing food on that land. I mentioned some of the technological ways that I'm, pursuing kind of this exit and build strategy. I don't use banks. I don't talk to certain government agencies. There's things like that I do in my life, which don't always make things convenient. In fact, make things very inconvenient. And to kind of add on top of that, I also have, according to the US government, I'm a felon. So that kind of makes things even more challenging, where you don't have a tax history or a bank history or these sort of things, and you deal with people more in cash or crypto. It can make life challenging, and I am in a position where I have a partner, a lady in my life, and she is very much on the same page, and she's willing to navigate some of these annoyances. But we don't have children, right? So at the moment, I don't have to also consider how these things are going to impact children and how that might make things more difficult. And I'm sure that would change in some ways, maybe not completely, but I'm sure it would alter some of the choices I make in these arenas. But I think that for me, what I'm trying to do is, as I said earlier, live as close as possible in our imperfect world, in line with my values. And it's a daily challenge, but it's one that for me feels worth it feels worth the struggle, worth the effort, worth the annoyance, worth any of that, because it's just what feels right in my soul. I don't really have any other way to express that or to say that. It's just what I know I'm supposed to be doing. And as I said, if that helps other people, then take some inspiration and say, okay, well, that guy's doing things that maybe don't interest me. I'm not ready to go buy a homestead and start growing my own food or build my own house and stuff like that. But I'm going to take inspiration from that and take the following actions, right? That to me is a success. That's really what I'm aiming for. And I think also, in a very realistic way, this is something I wrote about in my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, which if anybody's interested, you can download it for free, or you can listen to the free audiobook at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to, theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. I think the reality is that even in this space, there's probably a lot of people, and I don't mean just this space here on Twitter, I mean in this broader space, there are probably a lot of people who, in my view, are not still honestly contending with the severity of our current situation. I kind of mentioned earlier the US government announcing programs of wanting to survey people's social media for the last 5 years to start visiting the US. The biometric entry exit system starts in just 2 weeks, December 26th. All foreigners visiting the US and entering and leaving will have to submit to their face being scanned and their fingerprints being scanned. The European Union announced a similar thing back in October that's going to be fully implemented by April. The UK is announcing digital IDs under the Brit card program. Like, these things are staring us in the face. And as much as I love to travel and be a digital nomad, I think those of us who care about those things and who value our privacy are going to have to make some tough decisions in the coming years. And I don't mean 10 years. I mean the next 2, 3 years, 1 year, like here in this immediate time of what we're willing to do and not to do to maintain that privacy and that liberty that we care about. And another point I'll make is that I wish that there was also, sometimes I'll get critiques from people who say, well, Derek, your exit and build thing, it's just quote unquote running away. And I don't, I think that's unfair. It's not at all what I'm advocating for. But they'll say, well, we have to take the system head on. We need to, the only thing that's going to fix this is to hang them from the highest tree, or we need to have a revolution, or this kind of thing. And I always say, okay, well, you go ahead and lead the way, and we'll see how that goes. But also, I don't think there's resistance. I mean, when I go to the airport, just as one example, I'm the one person, me and my partner, we're the 2 people out of the whole line of thousands of people at the airport saying no thank you to facial recognition. And we get sent to a different line than everybody else. The average person has no idea it's even an option. Part of that is because they don't make it clear to them. My point is, I don't see resistance to these systems, definitely not any sort of mass way. And so I'm trying to work with people like Logos, like Sterling and Carrie and others, and learn about these tools, implement them into my life, and then be a loudmouth and tell other people, hey, come check out this cool tool, check out these people working on these tools, so that those of us who do value privacy and liberty can work to preserve it and navigate this really technocratic dystopia that is staring us in the face, because I don't think there's going to be a mass resistance. I don't think there's going to be a mass movement. I think the masses, history shows, will just go along with what is easy, what is right in front of them, and that path of least resistance. And so trying to do what I can to, at least, I guess, in all those challenges that you were touching on, find what works for me and then inspire others to find what works for them. I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but those are some lights.
Yeah, Derek, really, really well said. I think that what it boils down to is the individual, what's good for them, what's good for their family, and how can they figure out what makes sense for them, not only financially and economically, but also socially and spiritually, right? And this is by the way, I want to just mention real quick while I have the mic, Derek, it's technically time, and I want to be respectful of your time, but if you have another 10 or 15 minutes, we can go for just a bit longer to close up properly here.
I can hang out for another 10 minutes.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, just I'll be brief then. So even Derek is right. It seems like the great mass of people don't really have an interest in these things unless it comes to their attention, or it's on a lot of times it's too late because it's on your doorstep. But at the same token, we do tend to have a lot more hope, I think, in our spaces, because we do have the ability to try to exit. And if I'm a firm believer in this idea, this goes back to psychology, this neurological idea of mirror neurons. So whenever we're doing something, we're behaving in a certain kind of way, people see that, and then we act as models for them, which activates the mirror neuron system and causes a type of mimicry. So I believe that if we're creating these parallel societies and people are starting to leave, and we start demonstrably showing that freedom is possible, that censorship resistance is possible, that using this technology is possible, then more people will naturally tend to gravitate toward it, right? Paradigm shifts, historically speaking, within the grand arc of history, tend to happen slowly over time, but once they reach a fever pitch, more people tend to get involved. This goes back to the attractor piece that I was talking about earlier. We have to be, and this is speaking to what Derek said as well, we have to be the models for this type of behavior. We have to practice what we preach. We have to live our values as closely as possible, keep it as close to the chest as possible. And I think that's just a really important part of this process of helping to evolve our species or transition to a better phase of living and existence, especially as the world starts to get weirder and weirder, as Terrence McKenna often liked to say in his talks. Cool. So what I'd like to do now, I want to go ahead, Derek, if you have a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to throw out that I 100% agree with you, brother, and hopefully nothing I said prior to that was, I'm not the black pillar we were describing earlier. I also, do believe in that, and that's why I continue to work on this, and I also temper that with, just seeing how the masses, tend to move. But obviously, if I didn't believe it was possible, I wouldn't be here working on these ideas.
Yeah, I 100% see that. You would not be in this position and doing the good work that you're doing if because you would have just thrown your hands up by now probably and just exited of your own volition and we're not going to deal with all the people and became very, very removed from society, generally speaking. I think that's a lot of us here too. We understand that the problems are dire, but that we have to take some type of action, any action at all, to try to help resolve the situation in any way that we can. So yeah, in no way would I think that somebody would think that you're black pill. I mean, a part of your platform is helping to educate and wake people up, and that's admirable to the folks who have the mental lucidity and the patience to do that. That takes a lot of effort. So thank you for your work in that domain, friend. I think as we start to get ready to wrap up here, I do want to point out above before I forget. So if you guys look at the Megatron, Peter and Jared Hope, the founder of Logos, recently wrote a book called Farewell to Westphalia. A lot of the ideas that we're touching on today, Jared and Peter also cover at length in Farewell. So I recommend going to the link if you guys don't already have the book and getting a free copy. They have it open source. You can get the free copy there. I know Derek's got his books also open source. You can get his. We talked a little bit about how to opt out of the technocratic state, which I think these are two great companion pieces that you could probably read sort of side by side and get a full download on this information. I don't know about you guys, but I learn better when I actually read and have the time to go and process information and then take it in. The audio and the live stuff is also a good facilitator for that type of learning as well. So I want to give Derek now an opportunity to, if you have any final thoughts, give us that. Also, how people can get a hold of your content. You mentioned it briefly earlier, and maybe you can even talk about you're about to release a new book, I believe, right, as well, Derek. So feel free to cover what you want there in the few minutes that we have left.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. And thanks to everybody who's here for all the questions and the comments. Do feel free to reach out to me through email or through DMs or whatever. Always looking forward to connecting with more people who are focused on solutions. My main website where you can find my weekly journalism, my podcast and interviews I do, as well as my documentaries and my books is theconsciousresistance.com. And I've been running that website since 2013. If you're interested, just kind of more of my background, my history as an activist and a journalist, you can go to derekbros.com. And another website I'll throw out if you're curious more about some of the journalism side. My biggest documentary project I've ever worked on is about to come to a conclusion. It's a 17-part documentary series called The Pyramid of Power, which examines, more on the side of who and what are the institutions that are screwing with our world. You can find that at thepyramidofpower.net. I am preparing to release a new book. Actually, two books at the end of this next couple weeks, if everything goes well. There's going to be a companion book for the Pyramid of Power documentary series. The final episode of that will be out by the end of this month. And so we're going to be releasing the book version, which basically is just taking all of my scripts, all of my research for the documentary series, and then kind of turning it into a book so that, it's same information, just formatted slightly different from the original scripts. But the big project that I'm excited to release doesn't really have a whole lot to do with much of what we've touched on today, other than to say it details the journey I had to go through to get to the point where I'm doing this kind of work. And it is a memoir of my early life. I just turned 41 last week, and this book covers the period of my life from when I was 20 till about 26, 27, basically the beginning of my activism. About 20 years ago, November 16, 2005, I was arrested for possession of crystal meth. I had been in and out of drug and alcohol addiction right after high school, went right into college. I graduated early from high school, was doing all the things, and I just kind of got pulled into alcohol, pulled into drugs very quickly and very very extremely. I do everything I do extreme. So when it came to that, I was just as much of an extremist, and it grabbed a hold of me. And for about 2 years, I was bouncing in and out of that world. I got pulled into drug dealing, and eventually I got locked up at 21 years old. And that was the big beginning of me kind of changing my life. Before I was ever aware of these types of things, talking about liberty and freedom and so-called conspiracies or into journalism or any of this stuff. I was just, an 18-year-old, angry, depressed, kind of anarchist without a cause and without, any sort of philosophical understanding. And as I basically got locked up, and that was the beginning of me starting to do some of that internal work that Carrie was kind of hinting at earlier in the earlier part of our conversation. I know Sterling has done work on this as well back in the day under the psychologic anarchist name, and in his book as well. I started to basically, when I got locked up, I started to get into meditation and to prayer and started to kind of do some of the healing. I come from a family 3 generations back of drug and alcohol abuse. My father spent his entire life in and out of prison. I grew up visiting him in prison. And so when I got locked up, I just was like, this is not the direction I know I want to go. I need to figure out, why was I, stuffing so many drugs in my nose and my mouth as possible? Why did I think that was the key to enlightenment? And what is the root of those things? And so it led me on a journey, and I went in and out of prison myself. And when everything was said and done in October 2008, I was released. I had done 19 months over 3 years in and out. And as I said, I became a felon. But it was that process that really first started to, quote unquote, wake me up on a kind of spiritual, personal, psychological level. And that eventually, when I got out October 2008, about a year later, I heard of this guy named Ron Paul. I started reading some different books, watching some documentaries. And by 2010, I started an activist group in Houston, Texas, where I'm originally from. And then, everything else led to where I'm at today. So this book covers that journey. It's called A Man of My Word: How I Overcame Addiction, Depression, and Mental and Physical Prisons. It's going to be released on December 22nd. There's actually a landing page for it right now. I'll share it with you guys first. We're actually, literally, as I've been sitting here with you guys, I'm in the process of buying the domain. So it will be at amanofmyword.com. But right now it's at derekbros.com. And I'll drop a link real quick if anybody wants to check it out there. It is, like I said, it's just kind of my real, raw, gritty journey of overcoming these things, overcoming some mental health struggles, some self-worth issues, some drug addiction, and finding my way as a young man and eventually getting to where I am today. So that book will be out in just a couple weeks here. And I'm very excited to share it with the world. And that's, addiction and talking about those things has not always been a big part of my work. It's been, I share that story from time to time, but this is the most that I've shared in depth about my journey and my struggles there. So I'm really excited to just share it with people and see who it resonates with. And, my goal is that anybody who has dealt with these things, whether it's drug addiction, alcohol addiction, or just any other kind of struggles that they can relate to, that they might gain something from this. Because in my experience, the addiction problem is just as much of a big issue that in our spaces, in the broader freedom space, and it is as it is in the mainstream world. In fact, every time I've ever shared this story with anybody, people will come up to me and say, Derek, I've never had a drug addiction, but this is the way I've dealt with it. Or people will come up to me and say, oh, my son's dealing with drug addiction, or my daughter, my sister, my son, whatever. And I think it's a lot more prevalent than we realize. And it's because there still is shame around this topic. And I don't think there needs to be. So this is just my effort to try to, be real about what I've been through, where I'm at, and hopefully inspire some people to find their own way out. I sent the link to you as well, Sterling.
Yeah, I got it. And so by the way, guys, friends, all of Derek's links that he shared, I have posted in the chat and also published them to the Megatron above. So you can click onto those. And for anyone who doesn't here, that's part of the Logos community, it is highly recommended that you follow Derek. Like I mentioned earlier, Logos has been co-collaborating with Derek. We were involved with the People's Reset a couple of times, and we'll get to talk about it more later on, Derek. But we also want to invite you to be part of the Parallel Society event that Logos is hosting in Lisbon next March. But I'll give you some more details of that in private. I'm just really, you guys are hearing the invite from me to Derek right here.
I'd love to.
Yeah, let's chat it up and see how we can get you involved in what that actually looks like. But I think we're at our time limit now. I just want to say thanks to Derek for joining. We appreciated him and Carrie earlier coming in, dropping some truth bombs. I want to say thanks to everyone who's been in this space and who is an OG in the Logos community. Also Derek's followers who showed up to support this space and to support his work and to support the work at Logos. So I see. Also, thanks to speakers who came up and asked questions and spoke. Dave's up here, Chair, Citizen, thank you. We also have some OGs that have been in the space. Privacy Mages down there, Uzair, Tiger, Godfrey. Status Applications actually in the house. Definitely follow Status. We have Chris. We have Veronica down there also in the audience. ODPE, Ruler, Cecilia, James. Just a great group of people here. So let's keep up this process. Let's keep up the fight, guys. Let's not give up hope. As we've talked about today, there's a lot of hope in the form of not only technology, but the 3 pillars of exit, mental, spiritual, physical, emotional, all of the above. Let's continue to push this movement forward. Let's gain some momentum. Let's reach a critical mass for freedom, privacy, censorship, resistance, and decentralization. It's not just the tech, though. It's the community. It's the grassroots movements that we cultivate and the relationships within those communities that we cultivate that's going to help move this mission and create a better tomorrow, one filled with human flourishing and holistic betterment. Thanks so much, guys. We appreciate your time in the space. Thanks again, Derek. Much love.